Hemoglobinopathies are disorders of red blood cells in which we can have two different abnormalities. We could have a quantitative issue in which we have a decreased production of hemoglobin, or we could have a qualitative issue in which there is a dysfunction of the produced hemoglobin molecule. The normal hemoglobin structure has two main components, a heme group and globins, which are proteins. Each hemoglobin molecule has two pairs of globin chains. For example, two alpha chains and two beta chains. And that is what we classically see in the most common hemoglobin, which is hemoglobin A. Each globin chain is bound to a heme complex composed of iron and protoporphyrin. That means that if each hemoglobin molecule has 4 different globin chains, we also have 4 different heme complexes per hemoglobin molecule. Here we can see a hemoglobin molecule that I like to think about as a Lego, in which there are 2 globin chains, as we see here, that are in this case beta, and 2 other globin chains, which are alpha, that we see over here. Each one of those globin chains has a heme group that is the one that will bind to oxygen, as we can see over here. There are different subtypes of globins: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, zeta, and epsilon. And the combination of those globin structures will form different type of hemoglobin molecules. For example, the multiple combinations of globin chains lead to the creation of the different hemoglobin subtypes that we can see over here. The most common hemoglobin is hemoglobin A, constituted by 2 alpha and 2 beta. Hemoglobin A2 has 2 alpha and 2 delta globins. Hemoglobin F has 2 alpha and 2 gamma. Hemoglobin H has 4 beta. Hemoglobin Bart's has 4 gamma. And hemoglobin Lepore has a fusion of beta and delta chains. In hemoglobin disorders such as hemoglobin C, D, E, O, and S, they all have a hemoglobin A, which means they have 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains, but there is a mutation in 1 or 2 of those beta chains that will cause abnormal hemoglobin function. Importantly, in adults, the most common hemoglobin is hemoglobin A. It constitutes about 98% of the total amount of hemoglobin. This is followed by hemoglobin A2, which is about 2%, as we mentioned before. And there is a very small amount of hemoglobin F, or fetal hemoglobin, in the adults, which is mostly going to be less than 1%. That means that if hemoglobin A, which is constituted by alpha and beta globins, is the most common hemoglobin, abnormalities in alpha and beta globins are going to be also the most frequent hemoglobin disorders that we can see. To conclude this overview of hemoglobins, let's look at the differences between hemoglobin A and hemoglobin F. As we mentioned before, hemoglobin A is the most predominant hemoglobin in adults. It has a low affinity for oxygen, and that allows it to be very efficient at delivering oxygen to the tissues. In contrast, hemoglobin F is the predominant hemoglobin in fetus and newborns up to the age of 6 months. The affinity to oxygen in hemoglobin F is high, and that is very important because that makes it very efficient in uptaking oxygen from the placenta and to have enough oxygen even in low oxygen conditions.